Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pine Lily chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society's October meeting. I am very pleased to have this month Dr. Patrick Bohlen, who works for UCF. He's had a really diverse history in academia and research, and he's going to bring something really awesome to us tonight. So, without further ado, I will give you Dr. Patrick Bohlen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you once again for hosting an event for FNPS. You do a great job with that, and I know it's a lot to put on, and so I appreciate you doing that, and I appreciate getting invited to the Pine Lily chapter. Of course, I had to ask Valerie where the chapter actually resides, and she told me it's Osceola County, which is good to know. I think I'm in the, depends on where I go, Tarflower, but actually Couplet would be the Seminole County, so I'm kind of in between Tarflower and Couplet. So it's great group. I always love to interact with the FNPS, and I've learned a lot from FNPS, and I'm glad to provide whatever sort of humble insights I might have on native plants. Let's jump into my presentation. I took a little bit different tack tonight and decided I was going to present on a different kind of new topic in a different way, taking some ideas from other areas, which meant I had to come up with a completely new talk, but it was a pleasure to do that. And as Valerie said, I have had a relatively diverse career. I worked in a lot of different ecosystems. I have, in my research program, I've done a lot of management and been involved in managed ecosystems, both in agriculture and also, my role at UCF. I've been very much involved with landscape design, and maintenance as well, developing and designing and building and maintaining outdoor landscapes at UCF. And we also have a natural lands program there. So I cut across a lot of different themes in terms of understanding different ecosystem types, as well as having management experience and understanding how human management interacts with those things. And of course, human management is really all we've got left. And I wish, we could say otherwise, but this is, many of you have seen this, and I think I'll show another one of these during this talk, and you're probably getting tired of seeing it, but this is the 1,000 Friends of Florida projections for the development in the state of Florida. And as you can see, based on where the 2010 baseline is, we have a trend to 2070, which is kind of the most extreme trend. And later in the talk, I'll show you one that's a little less extreme, but is still quite developed. And basically, the way I like to it's not absolutely true. And as a scientist, I probably should only say true things, but basically Florida is going to be about 30% preserved, 30% developed, and 30% agriculture. And at this point, I think actually maintaining more agriculture would be very good for the environment relative to maybe the built environment. But we have these three things going on in the state of Florida. Unlike out west, where you might have a state that's got a lot of open land, we're a very developed state, but most of the United States is in private hands. And so a lot of our land is private. So if we're going to achieve any kind of conservation, if we're going to restore or maintain native plants, we're going to have to do it in landscapes that are developed, that are built, and that are managed for human purposes. In addition, obviously, to preserving our wonderful natural habitats. Now, this is the Living Planet Index. I think everybody knows about biodiversity loss, but I just wanted to point out this Living Planet Index, and you can go to that website there if you want to see some of the issues with it and what it really means. But basically, the overall point they try to make, if you look at this black part of the curve from 1970, which is when I was about 10, to today, we've seen this very large decline in what would be declined as kind of the biodiversity, the abundance and diversity of organisms on the planet. A lot of that having to do with abundance. And really, we're headed on a trajectory that really could take us down this gray path at the bottom. And so with all of our efforts, global efforts, all the efforts of FNPS, all the efforts of every conservation organization, all the efforts of E.O. Wilson, arguing for preserving 50% of the planet, we want to push that trajectory to the green top of that diagram, right? We don't want to be at the gray, we want to be in the green, and we're headed towards the gray. So we have to think about, what we do, and the built environment is one part of that, managed ecosystems are one part of that, and that's what I'm going to talk about more today. Hopefully most of you have heard of the concept of ecosystem services. They're kind of the services that nature that people get from nature. A lot of ecologists criticize that concept, but I think it's very useful because people understand things like food. They understand things like clean water. They understand wildlife and wildlife habitat. They understand the benefits of walking through the woods. They understand that we get food from ecosystems, and they know that our ecosystems perform important functions like storing carbon, cleaning air, and et cetera. So this concept of ecosystem services, when we look at the built environment or managed ecosystems, to me, we're really talking about improving the ecosystem services of managed landscapes. And one of those services, if you look at all these different services we have, obviously nature issues, biodiversity, and native plants obviously are nestled in there on both the supporting and those cultural services. And I think native plants actually contribute to all of these different ecosystem services, the main categories of these ecosystem services. Now, I'm kind of focusing on managing across this transect. I just want to give you just little snippets from pictures of things that I've done and systems I've worked in, and how native plants have interacted with that, and how I've interacted with native plants in those different settings. But what we're really talking about is all the way from going from less managed sort of natural, let's just say natural system in quotes, because we have so few truly natural systems left. Natural systems on the left side. In the middle, we've got agricultural systems. I've chosen cow-calf because I worked on a cow-calf ranch for 10 years doing environmental research. I just want to talk about low intensity agriculture and its importance for biodiversity. And then all the way to even more developed, and of course the extreme developed is urbanized. I guess industrial would be more, but most of us live in urbanized or suburbanized landscapes. And so the native biodiversity tends to go down as you go more intensive and as you work towards the center of an urban ecosystem, for example. The land use intensity goes way up, but the native biodiversity goes down. We know this, but based on the map I just showed you, we're going to have a lot of built, at least suburban and exurban urban environments. So we really need to think about how we're going to, or can we, maintain biodiversity in those systems. Everybody knows we live in a biodiversity hotspot. I know. I just want to emphasize what that means is not only that we are a very biodiverse system, but it also means that we're under a lot of development pressure. I think it's something like 1,500 endemic plants to be a hotspot, and 70% of the area already developed. So to be a hotspot, you can't just be where there's a lot of biodiversity. You got to be where there's a lot of biodiversity and a lot of development, right? Hopefully we all know that. So I want to go through kind of what that means based on looking back at that graph of the Florida 2070. What are we talking about? What do we have left? And I'm not going to focus a lot on forest or large scale natural systems like the Ocala National Forest or the Avon Park Bombing Range. I think we all recognize that those large parcels of land that we manage for their natural functions, that have land managers and maybe even scientific programs, I think we all recognize, I hope we all recognize that those are absolutely critical to any discussion about conservation, any discussion about native plants and saving native biodiversity. We know those are critical, and there's a lot of good people working on those areas and managing those areas and working hard to try to improve conservation and increase the scale of those. But most of us don't live there. We don't live in the forest. We live in a city. We live in a suburb, and a lot of people work in a managed landscape for agriculture in the state of Florida. And based on our climate, I once read a paper that said, does Florida need to have agriculture like we could outsource it to Brazil? But the fact of the matter is, you got a climate to produce food and plants, it's going to be an industry. And the horticulture, landscape, and agricultural industry is very, very strong in the state of Florida. But natural lands are the end that is the least managed, that is the lowest intensity. And, you know, we're very lucky. I tell people you are lucky to live in Florida, because we have conserved about 29% of Florida land in a variety of different ways. You see, we have mostly state and federal conservation land, some local government land. Some of that's very important and dear to the hearts of people. And private conservation is minimal. It's mostly state and federal conservation land. So that is where we're getting those big bucks I talked about earlier. Hopefully it's being managed well, and we're really having some great preservation there. But we all know that those systems need to be managed to get the outcomes that we want from them. If we look at the future land use threats on biodiversity, I think this is somewhat dated, even though it was 2013. This shows where we're most likely to lose, have the greatest threats to biodiversity in the United States. And you see the Southeast is big. It's crop and urban pasture expansion. I think if you look at Central Florida, we know it's dark blue. It's not light blue. We know that our expansion's urban. This is data from 10 years ago, and it's already we're already looking at a different situation. But anyway, we know this is where we're going to lose the biodiversity. This is where we're going to have the greatest threats to biodiversity in America. If it's a global issue, it's a regional issue, it's a local issue, and our local issues and regional issues here in the state of Florida are attached to the most significant biodiversity threats in the United States. And that causes some challenge, obviously. Development pressure, as we know, leads to fragmentation, and fragmentation of habitats is generally not good for a large variety of species that live in those systems. The corridors and isolation will become increasingly critical. We have some wildlife corridors left, and what we should really be focusing on is protecting those corridors. Natural areas are needed for urban populations. We're recognizing the importance of nature for health. Through COVID, it suddenly became aware to everybody that, boy, living in my backyard and enjoying nature and getting outside is really good for me. So we need those areas for a variety of reasons, and also for other cultural and recreational reasons. And then, we're going to need more conservation in urban areas. We're just going to need it. Or alternative, we don't have any conservation. So we need to figure out a way to do that. And so we do have these natural parcels, and many of the principles, though, that we need to apply to these parcels, I'll talk to some of them. To maintain these natural systems is a little bit more challenging in an urban environment than in Ocala National Forest or somewhere like that. But some of the principles are the same. And the reality is you're just not going to be able to have good conservation lands in urban or peri-urban interface with the wilderness unless you use fire in Florida. And that brings us to our program at UCF, which I'll just kind of focus on that for now. As we started a prescribed fire program back in 2004 because we had a wildfire. In the administration, we had several wildfires, I guess, since the beginning of the university. So the administration became concerned about that. They put some resources towards having a prescribed fire program, basically, so that we could actually get control of some of the overgrowth that was creating the fuels that fueled these fires. So at that time, we started that. And over the past 15 years, I inherited that program. I didn't create it. We have just made incredible, remarkable advances in applying fire in an urban, residential, suburban, more suburban type area that's really the wildland urban interface. There are challenges of burning here. You can see in the upper left, there's some residential area right next door to one of our units, very tight conditions under which we need to burn. And we burn this area. You can see the shot of a very nicely burned area. I will point out that a lot of trees died over a couple burns we had in this. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is a lot of our lands haven't been burned very well. And if they're overgrown, if you're going to reintroduce fire, you're going to lose trees, and you might lose a lot of them. That's okay in these systems from a biodiversity perspective, from my standpoint, because our flatwoods ecosystems tend to have open canopies. They tend to be more savanna-like. If they have closed down canopies, they move into a different kind of trajectory. But most of our biodiversity is in the ground cover. So losing trees is not that big a deal. Winter burns, summer burns are absolutely the best for biodiversity. I'm going to say spring summer burns, because at the end of our dry season, when everything was dry and we started to get our thunderstorms in May or June, sometimes even earlier spring, you're combining lightning with dry, and that creates natural fires. For management purposes, it's easier to burn in the winter because it's cooler. You can control the fires better. Relative humidity is better. It's basically a safer and easier time to burn. So yes, I agree with any ecologist who says we need to burn in the summertime, but sometimes you can't do it. So what we very often do in winter, you try to get that fuel load down, and then if you keep burning, you can get it down after a few, 3 or 4 burns where you can actually burn in the growing season. And we've done that at UCF. Now, this just shows you how much we burned from 2004 to 2020. And you can see we've really seen a big increase recently. And that's because we have a great team that's very committed to trying to get as much fire on the ground as possible. And success builds on success. I don't have a lot of detailed data on this, but we've done a little bit of monitoring. And what you can see, obviously, is that in that time, the percentage change in species richness in these burned areas, you see a big increase in ground cover. Shrubs, maybe a little bit of difference. And a lot of trees have actually died because when you haven't burned in a long time, the burn conditions can actually kill the trees, even though they're adapted to fire. So you see the increase in ground cover. Like I said, I don't have a lot of data. Some of that includes endangered species here. This is the many-bearded grass pink orchid. If you see there right here where these pink dots are, we might have seen just a few of those, years ago before we burned, and now we see them all the time, not in great abundance, but we might see a dozen or dozens. And these are flowers that bloom almost by the clock 2 weeks after a fire. So after the burns in this area, we're always going back out to see where's the pink. It is an endangered orchid. It's threatened as well. This diagram also shows our other threatened species that we have on campus, whether they're Florida endangered or threatened: Garbaria, pine lily, just for your group. So, this the burns really have increased our distribution of these species. And obviously everybody knows a well-burned flatwoods produces great. So this is great. This is what you need to do to encourage the native plants and the greatest biodiversity of native plants in flatwoods ecosystems. If you don't burn them, there's no other way to get there. So it is essential to think about how you're going to burn, or what are the alternatives you can't burn. We've had great fire responses in diversity. There's a grass pink. There's all kinds of grasses that have come, and wiregrass obviously being a key one. So we see all these very positive changes. And so over time, what we realized, we have these long unburned areas. We realized, and a lot of cities are faced with this, maybe a local community you're familiar with, to get in there and burn a long unburned area in a built environment is kind of a risky business. You can see how tall the palmettos here on the side. And we basically have learned from our experience what kind of relative humidity is appropriate. When's the best? Well, obviously you're going to do a winter burn in these systems. How you prep them. And we've really started to actually get into more and more systems. And so, it's possible to burn in urban systems. I would say suburban systems where you have significant parcels that are up against residential or built. It's possible to do it, but it takes a lot of commitment to do that well. And of course, we've learned how to prep. Here you can see a site that on the left was prepped a lot with, you have to do a lot of prep work if it's long unburned just to keep the fuel load down. And then you can see we had a successful burn in the regrowth in that area. And we couldn't do any of that without all these wonderful people who are part of a burn MOU with us. You can just see the number of partners we have there. The Nature Conservancy's been here several times, Division of Forestry. So that notion that we have these natural systems out there, they are managed systems. And in Florida, for the most part, especially in the uplands, we're talking about managing them with fire or vegetation management or invasive species control. And obviously it's easier there. The diversity is already there, hopefully. And that's a great resource in Florida. We have so many of these natural areas, but as we develop, we're going to come up against more of them, and it might be more difficult to have fires. And we also have many areas where they're not having as much success, where they haven't kept up with that. So they're losing their biodiversity. We are lucky to have students here and a lot of partners and collaborators. So we actually also do some training. These are folks from a fire camp class where they came and did their field burns at UCF. It's just wonderful to have be able to train through this program as well. And I had talked about I told you I was going to show you this diagram again, but in this case, we're looking at the 2070 trend on the left side. On the right side is an alternative, like if we did, I don't know what that means, smart growth or more controlled growth, but more preservation. You can still see it's pretty darn well built out. One thing you will notice on this graph is that you've got this spot in South Central Florida that's really staying green in the long term. And right now, that area is mostly where we have our cow-calf operations, which really the South Central and South Florida are the only really natural rangelands that exist in Eastern North America. So we have a lot of cattle production down there. And, a lot of that land, you drive through it, it looks kind of not very natural, but in fact, most of those areas are made up of improved pasture that have been planted with Bahia grass and fertilized and leveled and ditched and drained. And then very often most ranches, especially any large ranch, will have a lot of semi-native or even natural areas on those ranches. So these ecosystems in parts of the state and silvicultural systems, I guess I would say in the northwestern and panhandle areas, these are very important managed systems for maintaining native species and biodiversity. And I've been involved in a variety. I was fortunate to work with some plant ecologists down at Buck Island Ranch, where I used to work at Archbold Biological Station. Here on the right, you can see the map showing where the improved pastures and semi-native pastures are. And basically, we did a lot of work looking at wetlands and wetland plant species richness. This particular graph shows the differences between improved and unimproved pastures in how much non-native species richness they had, depending on what the percentage of perennial grasses was. And so these C3 perennial grasses are kind of the characteristic native grasses in Florida. The open circles are our native pastures. You can see there's a lot more perennial grasses there, and there's fewer non-native species. So some of these more semi-natural, semi-native wetlands actually have large numbers of species. Some of our sites had 50 species, small wetlands with 50 species, and don't tend to have that great a number of invasive species. And there's management things you can put in place to improve that. And basically a lot of these lands out there that nobody gets to walk on or see out there on the ranches of South Central Florida are rich with floral and plant native biodiversity. And there's a lot of ways to preserve that. Ranches can be developed like they are being in Kissimmee and other places like that, or they can be preserved. And if you really want to preserve those more natural or semi-natural areas, there's ways to do it. And it's usually through some kind of conservation easement and planning option, straight out purchase, such as by Florida Forever conservation easements, which pay a landowner to put land aside, develop, transferring. There's a lot of different tools that people use. And this little diagram on the left is just around Archbold Biological Station. You can see the station in yellow on the left, and then the MacArthur Ranch. It's actually not the MacArthur Ranch, it's Buck Island Ranch anymore here on the right. This whole region of the different kinds of conservation tools that have been applied to conserving what is essentially a managed ranch land. And these are just incredible, diverse and beautiful natural systems mixed in with a little bit more intensive agriculture. So there's a lot we can do and need to think about and do in agriculture too, when we're talking about native plants. Low impact agriculture like ranching obviously has greater potential, but even in our more intensive systems and maybe even in our horticultural systems, maybe we can think about ways of introducing more native plants into that. And some of the people that are working at that I know who are working at industry are doing just that.
Okay, wait. I love that map. Can we go back to it really quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a map, right? Everybody's looking at this and it's gray.
Yeah.
It's all kinds of gray.
Oh.
So I know why this map looks like this, but could you explain why you have this elevation relief map specifically?
Oh, so yeah, on the left side, this elevation relief map that makes up the gray, this area that looks that's higher elevation looks like a mini Florida, and these are the mini Keys and the mini Florida that existed millions of years ago when Florida was flooded. This is the very southern tip of the Lake Wales Ridge. If you're out in Groveland, you're out in Central Florida, you're on that ridge, the northern end of that ridge. This is the tail end. When you come off that ridge, it's actually it's almost like going down a roller coaster in Florida. You get into these flat, the difference in elevation among these ranches is like 3 feet. So it's very flat. And then all the different colors, obviously, are the different shades of patches are the different tools. But yeah, this is basically an ortho projection of the southern tip of the Lake Wales Ridge. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So I want to flip. I know I'm moving through a lot of subjects here, but I kind of started with natural lands on the low end, low land use intensity, more natural. Then brief example of one form of agriculture, which actually in Florida has very, very important conservation consequences, long-term resilience, sustainability, the whole 9 yards. And then moving towards the urban environment where we all live. Maybe a few of you are out on the ranch or out in the woods somewhere, but most of us live in these environments. And this is where we manipulate, change, alter, bring in soil, dredge, dig, plant, create the environments in which we live. And I've been very happy over the past couple of years to get involved with some leaders in various aspects of the landscape and outdoor industries, which was really spearheaded by Tim Sallin at Cherry Lake Tree Farm, the Outside Sustainable Landscape Collaborative. I am a founding member of that collaborative, but I feel more honored that I was even asked to be involved. And there's just wonderful people that we've had, and it includes some of our partners, some of the finest landscape architects in Central Florida, Chris Height, Mark Russell at Cherry Lake. Cherry Lake is a nursery, credible nursery, one of the best nurseries probably in the southeastern U.S., tree nurseries. And then we've got developers and folks who are actually, building new neighborhoods and developing in new areas, even in Osceola County. that have been involved in this partnership. So it's really looking at that, okay, we know now we're going into this more disturbed ecosystem. Can we do something in that area? And as native plant people, you're all saying, of course we can, but that's not what's happening for the most part. And even all of us native plant buffs who want to do that can't change the world if it's not done on a larger scale. And obviously where you are, we're out in that UCF, and I live out in this area. We got a lot of natural areas around us. We have a potential for having source populations and things like that. If you're in downtown, maybe not so much, but there's a lot of green in Orlando. If you look at that map on the left, there's a lot of forested residential areas all around downtown, and they can support a lot of biodiversity. I like this quote from Frederick Steiner from a paper that was published in 2020. Any landscape holds the possibility to both improve and regenerate the natural benefits and services of ecosystems. I think that's just fantastic. That to me is kind of gets to the core of sustainable landscaping. And as as I'm sure all of you are well aware, native plants have got to be a core part of that, no matter where you are on the planet. And there's principles, things like you still have to meet the aesthetic and environmental goals. We want to reduce energy inputs, fertilizer, and chemicals. Number 3 is the biggest one, I think, for most things that are being driven in the state and other regions of the world. Reduce water inputs. And, as a side benefit, increase biological diversity. And we're trying to build systems that hopefully are also more climate resistant. We've done a lot of things at UCF. I, again, feel very fortunate that I've been able to play around and experiment a little bit. I think, we're always trying to grow and learn and do more things. And we also have some limits and constraints based on what we can do. But we've greatly expanded the use of native plants at UCF. On the left, we've got the saw palmetto. We got lots of saw palmetto on campus. On the middle, we have thrialis, which is not native, but we have the porterweed in front of it for the first time, planting that. And then we do have some really kind of bold, large native landscapes. This one on the right was actually designed by Karina Vaudry, who may be here tonight and invited me into this program. So we have some really great examples of that as well. So we've definitely tried to push the envelope at UCF. We're not all native, but we do a lot of native things. And then we also have become a Bee Campus USA. We were the first one in the state of Florida. It is a pollinator conservation program hosted by the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation. So there's things we need to do every year to be part of that. And part of them is managing and keeping pollinator gardens, educating about pollinators. And, a key to that is native plants. Not all of good pollinator plants are native, but a lot of the good ones are. And the ones for the really small, cool native bees are almost invariably native species. And when we talk about pollinators, we also talk about butterflies. And there, if anybody who's familiar with Doug Talamu's work knows that the caterpillar is the key, because the caterpillar is the food for the bird. It takes a chickadee, I think what he said the other day, 9 to 10,000 caterpillars per nestling to create a baby chickadee. And caterpillars are in decline because they aren't as abundant on non-native vegetation. So you got to have the vegetation to produce the caterpillars. Birds are important, and I'll even show a couple birds here and pictures that folks took that have insects in their mouths. One is a caterpillar, one is not. But we've also done some things with bird planting. We have an Audubon group on campus, and they had got a small grant, $10,000, and we did a big native planting last year of a lot of small native trees and native shrubs in the front end of our Arboretum Park site, which is fantastic. And we look forward to seeing how that grows in. And they've got a little bit more money to do that. So that gives us that focus on birds. And in general, there's a major conservation issue with birds in urban environments. And, you've got to have the food source. And the food source is caterpillars, the main one for the babies. So you got to have the insects. Native plants are key to that. But we're not going to have native landscapes everywhere. And we're not going to do exclusively native. Chris Height is a landscape architect at Dix Height. We've talked a lot about this idea of transects. You're going to have high intensity, showy areas where people plant a lot of tropical things from different parts of the world and bromeliads and things like that. We're going to use those things. They have a lot of aesthetic potential, and some of them actually produce relatively reasonable ecosystem services. And then in the medium zone, hopefully we're combining and also using as a matrix the native plants. And at the lower end of the spectrum, that's where we really need to be all native and also try to control invasives. So that idea that there's just spectrum where you have to kind of tolerate, and then the thing is, native plants can drop in anywhere on this spectrum, not just in the low and medium, but also the high area. And we've been, trying to do that in our work as well at UCF. Again, more showy plants, more showy landscapes tend to have more introduced species because things like color that you can get, bright colors and year-round attributes that it's hard to find in a native. This is the most boring combination in the world on the left, the cordyline and the Schefflera, but it's also a very standard, easy thing to do. It's easy to take care of. It's durable. It's hardy, and it has a look. But you see here, even in this landscape, we put in Kuntis and a Perotis palm. So we try to put in natives everywhere, and I'm trying to work on standards at UCF where we would actually have requirements for including natives in our landscapes. And then we have this mixed one in the middle where we got the porterweed and thralis. And then on the edge, just again, following that kind of transect idea, we really have a full scale native landscape. Now, those native landscapes can be tricky on managing them. So a lot of times you plant these native plants and the management folks don't know how to do this. This isn't just a problem at UCF. It's a problem at Cherry Lake. It's a problem at Brightview. Every landscape firm, most companies have a very standard mow, blow, and go, trim the hedge attitude and training. And if you throw a plant at them that needs to be trimmed differently and managed differently at different times of year, it's very, very challenging. And we are working through some of those issues ourselves at UCF, because if you want to do this on a large scale, you can't be out being a gardener all day long. You have to do things that you can do at a landscape scale. And some of these plants are challenging. And a lot of that's just education and training and knowing what to do. And again, obviously in the built environment, we have a lot of green and blue infrastructure. There's a lot of blue infrastructure in Orlando because we got a lot of water. And so on the left side, we've got a conservation easement over here, but very often you'll find easements like that or protected wetland areas that do serve a hydrologic function. And in our case, most of our surface runoff goes through this wetland, this easement, which is protected in perpetuity, and you get a lot of filtration that way. But we also, as you know, in Central Florida, have a tremendous number of these stormwater ponds. In fact, in the Economacache watershed, there's a greater area of stormwater ponds than there is of natural lakes. And I think you all know how many lakes we have in this region. So stormwater ponds are big. A lot of them, a lot of neighborhoods, you see the grass mowed up to the edge and the herbicide sprayed to keep it clean. And here we've done a native planting at UCF with a student group that got some funding. And these littoral zones, even in a pond that wasn't designed to really have them built in, can provide a tremendous amount of habitat for invertebrates, pollinators, ducks. So there's a lot we could do and a lot more we could do with that. But we also have to think about long-term management and resilience. These systems need to be managed. So weeds and vegetation do need to be dealt with. But anyway, green and blue infrastructure in the built environment, in addition to what we talked about earlier, the natural preserves are important. And even in intensely managed systems and in more concentrated urban systems, you're still going to have your stormwater. I wanted to switch gears here too, and I know we're in Osceola County now. And I'm sure there's a lot of people part of the group that, have been upset about the development down there. The Split Oak Preserve is a big deal. And I had the same sensitivity about that. But I actually have gotten involved recently with a developer, with the developer who is part of this outside collaborative. This slides here, the next few slides were actually produced by Richard Levy, who works for the Stewardship District and the Sunbridge Stewardship District, which is a government entity, temporary government entity created by Florida statute. So this is a 24-acre master plan community. Many of you may know it. Tavistock's developing much of that area. And one of the things they want to do is they want to think about alternatives they can do for landscape. And a developer is driven a lot by financial criteria. So they need to make money. And if they're going to do something, it has to be for a reason. One of the reasons they really want to think about changing the plant palette is because they're going to have water restrictions. They're going to come up against consumptive use issues. So they need to think about reducing water for irrigation. And they also know there'll be potential benefits from that, where they can maybe do more green things and actually market those green amenities to the potential buyer. And one of the things they would like to consider is, can we have more native plants? Can we tell people we're, this is an environmentally friendly neighborhood that uses less herbicides and pesticides and has more native plants and pollinators? And if we're going to hit things with the amount of development that's happening right now, I don't think we're going to get there with native plants if we don't get developers committed to this, because this is the land change that's taking place right now, and getting a good starting with that in mind and being committed to that up front, I think it has some real good long lasting potential. Even though you can't always control the home buyer, it's good to start out that way. And there's all kinds of players involved in that, and it's not a very easy thing to make happen because it involves developers, it involves landscape companies and supply of material. It involves the builder, who is not the developer. The builder wants to be slick and easy in and out. So it's a challenging thing. But it is just 24,000 acres, but they have actually agreed, which some of the scientists, myself and Basil Yanona at University of Florida, who's a residential landscape ecologist, Pierce Jones, from the low impact community development group up there, they've actually agreed at their base camp, and this is a map of the base camp being planned for and currently built, currently under construction by Tavistock. They have devoted this whole corner, about 400 feet on each side, I think, to basically put in native plantings, and not only put them in, but put them in an experimental framework where we can examine different irrigation regime, the influence of different irrigation regimes, and compost addition at planting on the performance of the plants and other ecological and environmental characteristics. So it's really kind of a cool endeavor. They're funding this. The developer is funding this. They are actually agreeing to fund research. They're funding a student. They're planning to fund a student at UCF who'll be a graduate student. And they're working with the University of Florida, including Pierce Jones's group and Basil's group. So it's a really nice collaborative project where we're actually going to try to get these plants into the, tested and also have a path for finding acceptability among the consumers. So the objective of this whole neighborhood, though, is to develop a code that would be more, whatever you want to call it, ecologically sound, more ecologically sound than, let's say, the typical HOA being built today, meeting these goals, and also being financially feasible and being marketable. And I think, there's a lot of neighborhoods going up right now, and neighborhoods that people are fighting or have fought that are trying to put a green image on themselves. And the question is, are they going to do it and come through on it? And can this actually be achieved on a large scale? So again, here's the design, and Cherry Lake is producing a lot of the material, and also their landscape architect they have working with them right now, Mark Russell, has designed this repeating landscape where we have the experimental treatments embedded in what otherwise looks like a relatively natural setup. And for us, for Basil and I, this has been fun because we're blending sort of landscape architecture, native plant introduction, and scientific inquiry into these plots. So we're pretty excited about it, despite whatever the outcome might be. And I think it's good that we have all of these entities working together to support this kind of effort. So that's really where I want to end, because that's my current project. That's where we're kind of headed. And I really think that, wherever we look for biodiversity, wherever we look for conservation, and there's three main habitats that we're going to have in Florida into the future: natural, agricultural, and urban, that native plants are key to succeeding in preserving as much biodiversity as we can. And there's just a tremendous amount of knowledge yet to be gained, but also a lot we know that we can do if we can get these things on the ground. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and many people. I couldn't list the people on this slide who have contributed to these ideas and the projects involved, but I'd like to thank them as well for how they have contributed to my thinking on these subjects, and also the wonderful experiences that I've had. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to take those.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bohlen. We don't have any questions in the chat just yet, but if anyone would like to ask any, this would be the right time. So obviously you're showing beautyberry, which we have plenty of in Osceola County. And thank you for the shout out for the pine lilies. We love them here. Really our jam. And jam was like a play on words because you can make jam from
Oh, you can make jam, right? Or you can jam with it.
blueberries.
We'll keep talking about that. Say, I heard you can make jam out of these. I said, yeah, just add 10 cups of sugar
Right, yeah.
to
And a bunch of gelatin. Don't forget the gelatin.
the gelatin, right?
Or you just make
To
a
get it
syrup.
to gel.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting one there because just in terms of management, we have these in some of our pollinator gardens, and people say, oh, make them kind of as a backdrop and they can come up over. But sometimes, we want them up front, but then they look very shaggy. So
Yeah.
she started cutting them down to 6 inches tall in spring. And then the growth that you do have is always that new vibrant, 4 foot tall beauty berries by the fall. So that's just one of those little management things we've learned and applying that in a few areas.
Awesome. Well, I for one really appreciated your presentation, Dr. Bohlen, and thank you for all your hard work on normalizing natives and even these new developments.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure. If there are no questions,
No questions, so
I'll stop the share.
all right. And I hope you have an excellent Thursday night. And thank you for taking so much time with us and just caring about Osceola County in general.
I hope you have a good night too. Thank you.